Like many shonen characters, part of the secret to understanding Satoru Gojo's journey lies in his name. When looking at the kanji behind Satoru Gojo, the meaning behind his first name, Satoru, means enlightener, with the name Gojo meaning enlightenment, or to awaken to the truth and awaken from doubt. When pairing this with Satoru Gojo's famous quote about him alone being the honored one, it paints a much better picture of Satoru Gojo and a better understanding of his journey as the strongest sorcerer alive. Gojo is one of the most well-versed characters in the series, having tapped into the secrets of the Black Flash and the core of cursed energy. It's certainly a fitting name. But before Gojo would become the Enlightened One, he would make his first appearance into the world. On December 19th, 1989, Satoru Gojo would be born. Being a member of the Gojo clan, he was born into the lineage of one of the big three families of Jujutsu in Japan. With Satoru's birth would come the Six Eyes, an ability that skips generations of the Gojo clan, but landed on Satoru himself. The Six Eyes being connected to fate made Satoru destined for great things. And with that, Satoru Gojo burst onto the scene as the man that would one day become one of the strongest sorcerers of all time and tip the balance of the world itself. Curse users ran rampant around Japan, murdering for money and killing for their own gain. The Jujutsu sorcerers were small in number, and with their hands full with curses, curse users ran free, killing to their heart's content. Around this time, word of Gojo's birth began to spread across Japan. A bounty of 100,000 was placed on his head. First come, first serve. Going after the bounty, the trained killers assumed killing a child for such a price would be simple, but they were terrified at what they saw, immediately understanding the change in activity of cursed spirits based on his strength alone. Satoru Gojo's birth changed the balance of the world. This fame followed Gojo throughout his life and shaped his mentality along with his future. But while he was still a child, Gojo had no idea how far his fame would go and what else it would bring. The Gojo clan was one of three major Jujutsu families, with the Kamo family and Zenin families being among them as well. One of the members of the Zenin clan, Toji Zenin, heard about Gojo's fame and wanted to see what the Six Eyes were all about. Having zero curse energy, no one was able to sense Toji, with Gojo being the only person to have noticed Toji without seeing him. Something that Toji would remember, saying that it was the first and last time that anyone would sense his presence from behind. This moment cemented Gojo as a prodigy, but he had no idea how significant this moment would actually be. Something to note here is Gojo's age. As Gojo mentions himself, curse techniques typically manifest between the ages of 4 and 6. Gojo's age in his flashbacks is never openly stated. However, based on his height, his awareness, and his thought process, an argument that he's at least 4 to 6 years old in his childhood flashbacks can be made, meaning that at the time that Gojo met Toji and his would-be assassins, it's possible that he may have already had his curse technique at that time, making him even stronger than he would have seemed at first glance. This would be a massive upgrade for Gojo in his childhood, and would make it even more clear why when being hunted by assassins at such a young age, he had no fear for his life. Training his curse technique to even greater heights, Gojo would eventually enroll as a student at Jujutsu High, where he would meet his fellow sorcerers, Mei, Utahime, Shoko Ieri, and Suguru Geto. In his second year, Gojo would rescue both Mei and Utahime from a mission where a cursed spirit warped time, leaving them trapped for 2 days. During his student years, Mei would show an interest in Gojo, but it would never materialize into anything more. Gojo would eventually form a close friendship with Suguru Geto, a fellow second year, as both of them were the strongest sorcerers of their generation. Their rivalry would reach its peak over a clash of ideals, with Suguru believing that Jujutsu existed to protect the weak, and Gojo believing that looking out for the weak was exhausting, and that Suguru's rhetoric was garbage that was spouted by the weak themselves. This statement perfectly captured Gojo's views at this time in his life, as his outlook was based on power and power alone. Gojo and Suguru would be paired together on a mission from Master Tengen herself. Gojo and Suguru were tasked with bringing Tengen a compatible human sacrifice to stop her immortality from going out of control and threatening the entire world. Finding Tengen's human sacrifice, taking down a terrorist organization known as Q, and encountering bounty hunters along the way. During his fight with one of the bounty hunters, Gojo would go on to explain his curse technique, being able to see his opponent's curse techniques on a deeper level with his Six Eyes, infinitely slowing down anything that tries to harm him, and creating magnetic fields with his curse energy by controlling space. However, when one of their companions was kidnapped, Gojo and Suguru's mission would be diverted to Okinawa, Japan, where they would thwart the kidnapping and remain with Riko Amanai, the star plasma vessel, and Tengen's human sacrifice, and Kuroi, Riko's attendant, for another day. At this point, Gojo had been awake for 2 days straight and using his curse technique non-stop. However, with Suguru around, he saw no reason to treat this as an issue. But this decision would come back to haunt Gojo, as not taking his own exhaustion into account would be a major mistake, with consequences that changed his life forever. After entering Jujutsu High's barrier, Gojo and Suguru's mission seemed to have been successful. Taking down his curse technique, Gojo was finally given the opportunity to relax after 2.5 days of watching over Riko Amanai non-stop. But the moment that Gojo let his guard down, he was stabbed from behind by the same man that he met as a child, Toji Zenin. Gojo urged Suguru to take Riko Amanai and leave, to not miss Tengen's merger, and sought to deal with Toji himself. As Gojo egged on Toji about Riko's bounty already being lifted, Toji reveals that the bounty was his idea to begin with, in order to wear Gojo down before attempting to take his life. Gojo uses his curse technique several different times, but can't ever hit Toji, as with Toji having no curse energy, he was too hard to track. Even when tracking the cursed spirit wrapped around Toji's body, Toji was far too fast and far too prepared, eventually closing in on Satoru and stabbing him through the throat with the inverted spear of heaven. That forces the stoppage of curse techniques on contact, with Gojo being stabbed several times and seemingly defeated. For the first time ever shown, Gojo had lost, and with the defeat of Suguru and the death of Amanai, Gojo's mission to protect the world had failed. However, on his deathbed, Gojo would tap into the core of curse energy, unlocking reverse curse technique and healing all of his wounds. But Gojo wasn't only alive, he was a completely different person. Toji in disbelief charges at Gojo, but even with his eyes closed, Gojo dodges him effortlessly, blasting Toji with his reverse technique, Red Glow, and earning himself the title of a monster. Toji comes up with plans to stop every one of Gojo's abilities. Hooking the inverted spear of heaven to the chain of 1,000 miles, Toji launches his weapon at Gojo, and Gojo once again dodges, saying that he doesn't feel vengeful or angry towards anyone, that right now everything feels right, and that throughout heaven and earth, he alone is the honored one. Killing Toji with Hollow Purple that combines both infinities, and taking note of Toji's last words mentioning his son, who was going to be sold to the Zenin clan. Gojo has officially become the strongest sorcerer in his entire generation, with his own quote about his enlightenment perfectly illustrating the enlightened kanji behind his name. After beating Toji, Gojo masters reverse curse technique, pushing it to its limits, healing his brain at all times and making his limitless defense automatic and having it work around the clock, with detecting poisons and mastering his domain expansion being left on his to-do list. Gojo had officially become the strongest, and the close race between himself and Suguru was now wider than it had ever been. Gojo began to notice that Suguru was moving out of character. Suguru would then meet with Yuki Tsukumo, who came to find Gojo, but had a conversation with Suguru instead, telling him that a world where only sorcerers exist would stop the production of cursed spirits. And with Suguru's disdain for constantly eating curses, the growing pile of sorcerers' dead bodies, and his disapproval of the people he was working to save, Suguru went rogue, killing an entire village of 112 people, committing an act of mass murder similar to the one that he stopped Gojo from doing a few days earlier. Gojo, being devastated that his best friend became a rogue killer, confronted Suguru and demanded that he explain himself. But when faced with Suguru sticking to his plans to kill all non-sorcerers and sticking to his past actions of mass murder, Gojo couldn't bring himself to kill Suguru with his own hands. Considering Suguru's question of if Gojo was only who he is because of his strength, or if he's who he would have been without said strength, regardless, causing Gojo to reflect on what his power really means. As in his own words, while he was strong, he could only save those that wanted to be saved. This was a major turning point for Gojo's character, and would lead him to establish a new set of values once he became a teacher. Gojo would then remember the words of Toji Fushiguro about his son being set to be sold to the Zenin clan and go to pay him a visit. After trying to antagonize Megumi about the death of his father, Megumi's response floors Gojo, who's surprised at Megumi's mindset for his age, giving Megumi two options: to come with him or to be sold to the Zenin clan. Having been abandoned by their step-parents, Megumi's main concern being his sister Sumiki, finding out that the Zenin clan would be a terrible place for her, had no intention of joining the Zenins, leading Gojo to take Megumi under his wing. telling Megumi that he better get strong and to not get left behind. Megumi would then travel with Gojo as he grew older, learning to use his Shikigami along the way, with Gojo funding the lives of Megumi and Sumiki, and Megumi rescuing a girl named Hana Kurusu, who was being held captive by a curse, who Gojo accurately predicted would fall for Megumi in the future. It was also around this time that Gojo would meet a young sorcerer named Ijichi. After noticing that Ijichi lacked talent and a profession where you fight to the death, Gojo threatened Ijichi into taking a non-combat based role, something that Ijichi is grateful for to this day. Gojo's mindset shifted at this point from only caring about power to nurturing those around him, something that would benefit him greatly in the future. 10 years later, Gojo would become a teacher, watching over his students, Inumaki, Panda, and Maki Zenin, eventually gaining a new student, Yuta Okkotsu, who had a special grade vengeful spirit, Rika Orimoto, attached to him that called for his immediate execution. With Gojo being the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, he was the only one that could carry Yuta's execution out. However, Gojo chose to train Yuta to master his power and to use it for himself, stopping Yuta's execution altogether. As Gojo said himself, if Yuta's execution was set in motion again, that the Jujutsu elders shouldn't forget that he's on Okkotsu's side, and that he refused to let anyone take away the best years of someone's life, threatening the Jujutsu elders and taking in Yuta Okkotsu as one of his own. This moment highlights Gojo's leadership qualities that he gained over the years, as he's now willing to put himself on the front lines to protect others, compared to his disregard for the weak when he was younger. Bringing Yuta onto his team, Yuta was now in the company of Panda, Inumaki, and Maki Zenin, and with Yuta's goal being to unravel Rika's curse at Jujutsu High, Gojo gladly agreed to assist. Gojo would send Yuta on his first mission with Maki Zenin, which after a full summoning of Rika, eventually ended in success. He would then tell Yuta that the only person that could unravel Rika's curse was Yuta himself, and have him work to master channeling Rika's power, sending him to train with Maki Zenin, one of the best curse tool users that Gojo's team had. Gojo would then send Yuta on his second mission with Toji Inumaki, which again ended in success. However, when Gojo heard about Yuta and Inumaki's mission being sabotaged, the curse energy residuals couldn't be mistaken for anyone else. Suguru Geto had returned. Gojo and Suguru would meet again at Jujutsu High, where Suguru with his thousands of cursed spirits would declare war on all of Japan, leading to intense preparations on both sides, as Gojo claimed that it was hard to imagine Suguru starting a war that he couldn't win. But even with that, Gojo was ready to go all out and take down Suguru if need be, not being clouded by his emotions in the slightest. The day of the night parade of 100 demons would come and 1,000 curses would be released in Tokyo and Kyoto. All three of the big Jujutsu families, the alumni, and all the students gather to fight against Suguru, with Gojo standing on the front lines. Recognizing that Suguru wasn't on the front lines, Gojo sends Panda and Inumaki to intercept him, while Gojo focuses on taking out one of Suguru's strongest soldiers, Miguel. After Suguru's defeat at the hands of Yuta Okkotsu, Gojo and Suguru come face to face again. The two talk about their decisions throughout Yuta's journey, Suguru's attempts to capture Rika, and reminisce about the past. Gojo tells Suguru something that has yet to be shown, and Suguru tells Gojo that with the world being the way that it was, he could never be happy from the bottom of his heart, before Gojo kills Suguru with his own hands. But this is far from where Gojo's story ends, and some of his decisions in this moment would come back to haunt him later. After killing his best friend Suguru, Gojo was distraught. The loneliness that he felt at the loss of Suguru, the one person who could understand the solitude that peerless strength would bring, ate away at him since Suguru's departure, and especially after Suguru's death. Looking onward as if looking directly into the future as he set his new goal. While he had unrivaled strength, that wasn't going to be enough to change the world around him, giving birth to Gojo's new ambition: to foster strong and clever allies so that no one would ever feel that same loneliness again. Gojo would continue to nurture his students for another year, until Maki, Panda, and Inumaki all graduated to second years. Megumi would become a first-year student, and Gojo would look to gain even more allies than what he had with him. With Megumi as one of his students, he would begin to send him on missions to hone his strength even further, sending Megumi to find one of 20 special grade cursed objects, a finger of Ryomen Sukuna. On his way to tracking down the special grade cursed object, Megumi would meet Itadori Yuji, a high school student with extraordinary strength that compared to Maki Zenin herself. The two would be put in a life-threatening situation where Yuji would eat the cursed object, and even with 1 in a million odds, would become a vessel for Ryuman Sukuna. Gojo would then arrive and see Yuji for himself, and with absolute confidence tells Yuji to swap with Sukuna for 10 seconds. While Sukuna was strong, Gojo, as the strongest sorcerer alive, was the perfect person to gauge Sukuna's strength. Gojo would then have his first fight with Sukuna, telling him that because his student is watching, he's going to show off a little. Gojo then smacks around Sukuna, teleporting and dancing all around him. Even with Sukuna using his curse technique, he's not able to damage Gojo a single time. Yuji then suppresses Sukuna as they agreed upon, and Gojo recognizes Yuji's potential as a vessel, and upon Megumi's request, Gojo agrees to save Yuji's life. But saving Yuji wasn't something that was entirely in Gojo's control, with this becoming a theme in Gojo's life as time goes on. The Jujutsu elders would then sentence Yuji to be executed, citing that something as dangerous as Sukuna couldn't be allowed to reach its full strength. And despite Gojo's best efforts, the best agreement he came to was either have Yuji die immediately, or for Yuji to die after consuming all 20 fingers of Sukuna. With Yuji agreeing to take on all 20 fingers of Sukuna before his death, Gojo takes Yuji in as his student, and their journey begins. Sukuna would then challenge Gojo, saying that when he makes Yuji's body his, Gojo will be the first person he kills. While Gojo appreciates someone with Sukuna's history as the king of curses in the Heian era, wanting to fight him specifically, when questioned by Yuji about if he would lose to Sukuna at full strength, Gojo is confident that he'd win. Highlighting Gojo's confidence as the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, his willingness to protect his students and those around him, and foreshadowing events that would come in the future. Gojo would then feed Yuji yet another finger, and upon seeing Yuji's capacity and willingness to take in Sukuna, his admiration for Yuji would grow, stating that a talent like Yuji only appears once every 1,000 years. After finding Nobara Kugisaki, his third first-year student, Gojo would then send Nobara and Yuji on their first mission, which ended in success. However, things would change when Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi were sent on a mission to fight a special grade cursed spirit while Gojo was away. A mission that resulted in Yuji's death by Sukuna's hands. Once Gojo returned, he knew that Yuji had been set up to be killed by the Jujutsu elders that wanted him executed from the very beginning, as no first-year student would ever be sent to exercise a special grade cursed spirit. This would lead to Gojo stating that he wanted to kill all of the Jujutsu elders by himself, but he realized that no one would follow him if he took power through a massacre, with his dream being to change the Jujutsu world through fostering strong, intelligent allies, rather than doing so through brute force, with Yuji being one of those that he was betting on for the creation of his better future, as Yuji was a fighter with the potential to rival Gojo himself. To Gojo's surprise, Yuji never fully died and was brought back to life after engaging in a binding vow with Sukuna against his will that Yuji was no longer aware of. Even though this binding vow would spell trouble for the future, Yuji was now alive. Gojo's declaration of his dream is a stark contrast to his views of strength standing above all else in the past, and is a direct callback to his new ambitions after the death of Suguru. Meanwhile, an ancient sorcerer from the past, Kenjaku, was plotting to seal Gojo inside of a special grade cursed object called Prison Realm, where he would never be able to escape with his own strength. Although a special grade cursed spirit, Jogo, wanted to fight Gojo right away, despite Kenjaku's warnings that Jogo would die. Gojo is then hunted by this cursed spirit who can not only communicate with him, but who's even stronger than the Sukuna that he fought in the beginning of the series. Jogo attempts to burn Gojo to the ground with several of his techniques, but due to Gojo's infinity, Jogo can't touch him a single time. After explaining to Jogo that his curse technique infinitely slows down anything that tries to touch him, Gojo mauls Jogo and chases him down relentlessly. Gojo then stops his brutal beatdown of Jogo upon noticing that it was the perfect opportunity. Once again, we get to see Gojo destroy one of his enemies, which is one of the most enjoyable things to see from his character. Gojo uses his curse technique to teleport to Yuji's location to bring him to Jogo as a moment of training. Egging Jogo on by calling him weak, Gojo gets Jogo Jogo to use his domain expansion, the Coffin of the Iron Mountain. Gojo protects Yuji and uses the moment to educate him on domain expansions, telling him about all of their benefits and how to survive them before unleashing his own domain to counter Jogo's, Gojo's Unlimited Void. Gojo's domain floods infinite information into Jogo's brain, every sensation onto his body, and all actions in life onto him at one time, infinitely, to the point where Jogo can't even move, causing Gojo to call out the irony of the situation, saying that when given everything, you can do nothing. This statement is a direct reference to Gojo being given the most power out of any Jujutsu sorcerer alive, but being unable to save the ones he cared about when it mattered the most. An excellent choice of words to summarize his character. After Gojo defeats Jogo, Jogo's fellow cursed spirits would come to rescue him. Gojo would go on to teach Yuji the fundamentals of cursed energy, and claim that in due time, even though Yuji doesn't have a curse technique, his body would eventually learn Sukuna's on its own. At the exact same time, Kenjaku's plans to seal Gojo would be put back into motion. With the Kyoto exchange event on its way, Gojo would take Yuji on many harsh missions, teaching him how to effectively use his cursed energy. After this training, knowing what he had up his sleeve, Gojo moved on to confront Principal Gakuganji, one of the elders behind Yuji's attempted assassination and his execution, telling Gakuganji that the new generation won't be limited to special grade, and that more and more people would begin to question the authority of Gakuganji and the elders as time went on. All of this is a part of Gojo's dream to foster stronger allies to reshape the Jujutsu world, with Yuta, Okkotsu, Yuji, Todo, Megumi, and others all being a part of Gojo's vision to reshape Jujutsu as a whole. All of the students of Tokyo and Kyoto would gather and the Kyoto exchange event would begin, but not until Gojo reveals to Principal Gakuganji that Itadori Yuji was still alive, which alarmed Gakuganji as he played a hand in plotting out Yuji's death. And seeing the look of fear and frustration on Gakuganji's face was something that Gojo took great joy in. As the games were underway, the students began to compete and fight each other to the best of their ability, as Gojo and the other teachers watched from a distance, even calling out directly that Maki Zenin not being promoted beyond grade 4 because of the Zenin clan's interference was something that needed to end. Although the entire exchange event would change when Mahito, Hanami, and their henchmen would invade the Kyoto exchange event in search of Sukuna's fingers. As Hanami and the others attacked the students, Mahito moved inside of Jujutsu High, searching through 1,000 revolving doors to find the storage room where Sukuna's fingers were kept, although a curtain was formed to deny Satoru Gojo access, in an effort to keep him from noticing the activity going on away from the curtain by Mahito. Gojo's strength was far too great at this point to let him pose a risk to Kenjaku's plans of retrieving the fingers of Sukuna, so keeping him distracted by having him think he needed to break into the curtain instead of figuring out what's going on outside of the curtain was a very well thought out play. Hanami descends upon the students of Tokyo and Kyoto and is far too strong for even an entire group of their students at the same time. Megumi, Maki, Noritoshi, and Inumaki all fall to Hanami, who's mostly unfazed by all of them except for a few minor injuries, those being from Maki's Playful Cloud and Megumi's Divine Dog Totality. Just as all hope seems to be lost, Todo and Yuji arrive to fight Hanami themselves, Yuji being stronger from both Gojo and Todo's training, and Todo being powerful in his own right, are enough to give Hanami the fight that it needs. The fight is brutal, and both sides have a brush with death more than one time, with Hanami being pushed to its limits and Todo saving his own life and Yuji's in the nick of time. Just as Hanami is pushed to its absolute brink, it brings out a hidden ability, the ability to absorb the life energy of nature and convert it into cursed energy, that it funnels into itself to use its ultimate technique, its domain expansion. Just as Hanami is ready to use the most powerful move that it has, Satoru Gojo breaks the barrier that's been holding him back all this time and stares down at the enemies below him, with all of Gojo's enemies immediately retreating and those who didn't being captured and interrogated later on. But not before Gojo launches Hollow Purple from across the entire exchange event to rip apart Hanami before it can flee underground, leaving Hanami barely hanging on for its life in the end, creating one of the most iconic moments that Gojo has ever had, with a theme song that many fans of the series will find to be familiar. This was undoubtedly one of Gojo's peak moments in the Jujutsu Kaisen series. Mahito successfully completed his step of Jujutsu High's collection of Sukuna's fingers, and the 3 Curse Wound death paintings, Choso, Aso, and Kichizu, It was now time to begin the preparations for sealing Satoru Gojo in Shibuya on October 31st. After Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara successfully defeated special grade cursed spirits in the death paintings Aso and Kichizu and a finger bearer, Gojo would make arrangements for Todo and Mei to recommend all of his remaining students, Panda, Maki, Nobara, Megumi, and Yuji to grade 1 sorcerers. Kokichi Muta, the pilot of Mekamaru, reveals that he's the one that gave Mahito enough information to successfully pull off his theft from Jujutsu High, in exchange for Mahito healing his body from the negative effects of his heavenly restriction that crippled him and gave him pain in his body. And though he put up a good fight, he's ultimately beaten by Mahito and killed before he can return back to Jujutsu High. With that, October 31st came, and the attack on Shibuya was set to begin, with thousands of people trapped inside of Kenjaku's barrier only being told to say one thing: bring Satoru Gojo. Gojo, being fully aware that he's walking into a trap, goes anyway, as he's completely willing to put himself on the front lines to protect the people of Japan and his students, with the very first opponents that Gojo runs into being Choso and the Disaster Curses themselves, telling them to bring it on. Gojo is once again showing not only why he stands at the top of the Jujutsu world, but also why he's considered to be a leader by many, with his character of facing his problems head-on being on full display in Shibuya. The fight between Gojo, Choso, and the Disaster Curses is highly strategic. Not only have the Disaster Curses blocked all of the exits, they've filled the entire area with civilians and even given the impression that more civilians may be behind the blocked exits themselves. They've worked out a way to bypass Gojo's curse technique with domain amplification, and even made sure the area was packed to the brim with people so that if Gojo used any of his curse techniques, the people in the area would die. However, even with this, Gojo was unfazed, mocking Jogo and the Disaster Curses for thinking that they could beat him in the first place. Tricking Hanami by keeping his curse technique deactivated, Gojo rushes after Jogo, who runs away in fear. Hanami misreads the situation and deactivates its domain amplification, and Gojo rips out Hanami's eyes and blows up its entire body into paste with his curse energy, causing Jogo to question if there's anything that Satoru Gojo doesn't have. After Mahito shows up and unleashes 1,000 transfigured humans, Gojo pushes his own limits and uses a domain expansion of 0.2 seconds to stun all of his enemies and wipe out 1,000 transfigured humans in a span of 5 minutes, once again proving why he's the strongest sorcerer alive. Although Gojo's victory would be short-lived. The entire reason for the Disaster Curses stalling Gojo for time was to keep him occupied long enough to trap him inside of Prison Realm, and with Prison Realm now being thrown in front of him by Kenjaku, the time to seal Gojo had finally come. As the gate of Prison Realm opened, a sinister eye stared at Gojo, and as Gojo stared back into it, he prepared himself to make his escape, until he was stopped in his tracks by something that he never would have expected: the body of Suguru Geto, his best friend who he had killed a year before with his own hands, living, breathing, and leading the attack on Shibuya. Although Gojo tried to deny what was in front of him, his 6 eyes told him that Suguru's body was real, and 3 years of his youth came flowing into his mind. And with Prison Realm's requirement being for 1 minute of time to pass inside of the mind of its target, 3 years worth of Gojo's memories flooding through his brain all at once was more than enough. Unable to use his curse energy, Satoru Gojo had been sealed after finding out that the body of his dead best friend was being possessed by Kenjaku, and Gojo wouldn't be seen again until the introduction of a new world, with the aftermath being summarized by a single statement from Kento Nanami: with Gojo being sealed, it was over for all the humans in the country. The events that would follow were grim, as it became far clearer how much of an influence Gojo had on the Jujutsu world with his presence alone, and what the lack of his presence would bring. The moment that Gojo was sealed, the Disaster Curses began to run wild in Shibuya, resulting in the death of Kento Nanami, the unconfirmed death of Nobara Kugisaki, the death of Naobito Zenin, heavy injuries from Maki Zenin, and the loss of Todo's arm, with Kenjaku leaving unharmed with the front of Prison Realm in hand. The fight in Shibuya was gruesome, and while the sorcerers eventually came out on top, it was not done without sacrifice. As Ino Takuma pointed out, Gojo has saved many sorcerers. He slowed the execution of Itadori Yuji, stopped the execution of Yuta Okkotsu, and has opposed the Jujutsu elders many times, and this did not go unnoticed. The moment that Gojo was sealed, Masamichi Yaga was set to receive the death penalty for being accused of being a traitor with the power to create an army. Satoru was branded a criminal and permanently exiled from the Jujutsu world, with anyone trying to free him being branded as a criminal act, and the suspension of Itadori Yuji's death sentence was removed, with his executioner set to be Yuta Okkotsu. However, Gojo was smart enough to think ahead. Contacting Yuta Okkotsu before he was sealed, he requested that Yuta look out for Yuji if anything happened to him. With that in mind, Yuta Okkotsu once again faked Yuji's death, and the culling games would begin. The culling games were brutal all the way around. Megumi and Yuji both fought until they were near their limits, but ultimately survived. Yuta Okkotsu brushed closely with death, but ultimately defeated his enemies in Sendai Colony. And Hikari would endure some of the most gruesome injuries that could have been imagined, but in the end, they all survived. However, Yuki Tsukumo would not have that same level of success. In the fight between Yuki, Choso, and Kenjaku, Yuki Tsukumo sacrificed her life in an attempt to take Kenjaku down. And with Kenjaku surviving due to Kaori Itadori's curse technique, he absorbed Master Tengen, putting Tengen and her powers completely under his control, laying the foundations for his plans to merge Tengen with the entire planet and create a cursed spirit that would unleash chaos on the entire world. In the midst of all the chaos, Megumi Fushiguro, Gojo's oldest student, was taken over by Ryomen Sukuna. After forcing him to consume a supercharged version of Sukuna's finger, Megumi became Sukuna's new vessel. With Megumi's spirit having been broken by the shock of his sister Sumiki becoming a vessel for the Heian-era sorcerer Yorozu, Megumi was unable to regain control of his body. And with Sukuna forcing Megumi's soul even lower with his bath ritual and murdering Sumiki with Megumi's curse technique, Megumi's soul had reached the lowest that it had ever been. The time to unseal Gojo was now, but with the inverted spear of heaven being broken by Gojo himself, and Miguel's black rope having been exhausted during the night parade of 100 demons, the ways to unseal Gojo were slim. Although during their journey in the culling games, Yuji and Megumi met Hana Karusu, the vessel of a Heian-era sorcerer named Angel that could dispel barriers and erase curse techniques. Though Angel sustained injuries when Sukuna took over Megumi, she was taken to Shoko Ieri and ultimately healed. With Choso having received the back of Prison Realm and Angel's life no longer being in danger, it was time to unseal Satoru Gojo for good. Bringing Prison Realm out into the open, Yuji and all the other sorcerers that joined his side during the culling games prepared for Angel to unseal Gojo with her curse technique, Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder beamed down from above, causing a blinding explosion as Angel flew high into the sky and aimed her curse technique directly at Prison Realm. But Gojo was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, there was an earthquake. Satoru Gojo was very much alive. Although Gojo had only been sealed for 19 days, far more happened than he anticipated when he was sealed in Shibuya, and it was now time to take down the root of the problem, Kenjaku. Having escaped from 800 meters beneath the Japan Trench, taking out all of Kenjaku's seals along the way, hunting Kenjaku down and telling him to choose his words carefully as they would be his last, rushing to attack him but being met by another familiar face. Gojo was now face to face with Sukuna and Megumi's body, and he was visibly not pleased, noticeably not happy at what had happened to his oldest student. As Sukuna and Gojo taunted each other, Uraume reacted swiftly and insulted Satoru Gojo, with Gojo launching her with a single attack as if she never existed to begin with. As Kenjaku entered the frame, he reminded Sukuna of their other obligations. The fight between Gojo and Sukuna was postponed until December 24th, the date of Suguru's death. With Kenjaku questioning if Gojo was confident that he could win, Yuji's words echoed into Gojo's head from one of their first conversations together.
Stronger, him or you?
Well, if Sukuna regained all his power, he might cause me a little trouble.
But would you lose?
I would